You're standing by the front door with your shoes already on, and you're not going anywhere. You've been standing there for almost 10 minutes, hand near the latch, telling yourself you'll leave in a second, and the second keeps not arriving. The television is off behind you, and the apartment has gotten that particular kind of quiet that isn't peaceful so much as waiting. Outside, the evening is doing what evenings do. Porch lights coming on down the street, someone's dog barking at nothing, the ordinary machinery of a neighborhood that has no idea what's happening behind your particular door. You're not afraid of anything specific out there. You're afraid of being seen the way you currently are. By anyone. Because being seen means being real, and most days lately you've preferred to disappear into your own four walls rather than test whether the world still has a place for you in it. You tell yourself you'll go tomorrow. You told yourself that yesterday too. There is a man who stood at that exact same door for 14 months. His name was Walter Mercer. He was 52 years old, and he had one habit, one small, nearly invisible habit, that he had carried for almost 3 decades without once thinking of it as anything special. Until the evening he finally understood what it had quietly been doing for him all along. If you'd passed Walter on the street in those months, you would have noticed one thing. Just one. Clipped to the zipper pull of his jacket, a faded laminated badge. Company photo. Name on it you couldn't quite read anymore. The logo of a manufacturing plant called New Haven Precision, a company that had ceased to exist over a year before you saw him wearing it. He knew it was gone. He knew the building sat empty off Route 15 with a for lease sign the size of a billboard. He had driven past it twice, by accident, and both times kept his eyes on the road like he was passing something he wasn't ready to look at directly. But the badge stayed on the jacket. The way some men keep a wedding ring on after a divorce. Not because they've forgotten, because removing it would mean something they're not ready to say out loud. Walter had worked at New Haven Precision for 19 years. The last 6 as shift foreman. He was the kind of man other men called reliable, not as a compliment exactly, more like a fact of the physical world, the way you'd call gravity reliable. He drove 3 co-workers to work every single morning because their cars couldn't be trusted, and never once mentioned gas money. He hadn't missed a shift in 19 years. Not one. He used to mention that at company Christmas parties with a quiet pride men his age don't usually show, the particular pride of a man who has staked his identity on showing up, and who has never once been tested on it. Then the plant announced it was automating its remaining lines and moving operations to a facility in Tennessee that required 1/3 the workforce. 16 people got letters on a Thursday afternoon in March. Walter was one of them. He was 49. He was not worried. He told his wife, Linda, who was already his ex-wife by then but still called most Sundays, that it would be fine. He believed it when he said it. He had references. 19 years of them. He had experience running a floor, managing people, holding a shift together when things went wrong, which they always did and which he was always ready for. He had connections, and that word, connections, is the word men in that position always reach for first, the word that sounds solid until you actually press on it. He updated a resume he hadn't touched since the Clinton administration, sitting at the kitchen table of the house he'd owned for 11 years, and felt a strange lurching sensation reading his own history back to himself, like finding photographs of someone you recognize as you from a time you didn't know you were going to miss. The interviews came, a few of them, then fewer, then none. 6 months in, his severance was gone. Unemployment paid $186 a week, which he did not tell anyone about because $186 a week felt like information that would change the way people looked at him, and he was not ready to be looked at that way. He applied for positions that were already filled. He sent follow-up emails into silence. He started checking his phone in a way he never had before. Not hoping for good news exactly, just hoping for any news, any evidence that something somewhere was moving. A year in, everything was gone. He sold the house, not dramatically, just sensibly. The realtor said it was the right call given the math, which was true, and which did not make it feel like the right call when he handed over the keys. He moved into a 1-bedroom apartment that smelled like someone else's cooking through the walls. He was 3 months behind on that rent before he turned 52. His entire net worth, the week he sat down and forced himself to look at the real number. Not the approximate number, the actual number was $612. He stopped opening the mail. It collected on the counter in a stack that grew its own geography. He stopped answering calls from numbers he didn't recognize, then from numbers he did, including his sister in Hartford for 9 straight days, a stretch he still doesn't like to think about. He ate standing at the kitchen counter because sitting down to a table built for more people than just him felt like a small and specific cruelty he didn't need to add to the rest. He'd kept the table when he sold the house. A 4-top oak scratched on one corner from when the kids were small. He never once ate at it. He still got up every morning at 6. Still made coffee. Still sat with his laptop open at the counter, as if the posture of a working man might be close enough to the thing itself. Sometimes he submitted applications. Sometimes he just stared at the screen until the coffee went cold. He started to understand, slowly at first and then all at once, that the problem was not his resume, not his references, not the companies he was applying to. The problem was something no cover letter could fix. He was a 51-year-old man trying to enter a market that had already made up its mind about 51-year-old men. He did not say this out loud to anyone. Not to Linda. Not to his sister. Not to the guys from the old shift who still sent texts asking how things were going, to which he replied, plugging away, which is the American version of a sentence that means nothing in any language. One evening in November, he drove to the Walmart on the edge of town just to be somewhere with fluorescent lights and other people moving around. He walked the grocery aisles for 40 minutes, bought a bag of coffee and a box of crackers, got back in his car and sat in the parking lot. Not crying. Not calling anyone. Just sitting. He did the real math on his phone. Not the approximate math he'd been doing for months, the math that always somehow added up to fine if you squinted at it right. The actual math. Rent. Utilities. Food. The number of months $612 could carry him if nothing changed. It was less than 2 months. He drove home. He helped nobody with their homework that night. He watched nothing on television. And at 11:40, he stood in his kitchen with the refrigerator open and looked at nothing for a long time. The one thing Walter still did, the only thing that had survived intact from the person he used to be, was walk. Not for exercise. He hadn't thought of it that way in years. He just walked. Most evenings, after the sky went dark, he'd put on the jacket with the badge and go out the door and walk the same 2-mile loop, down past the diner on Elm, left on Prospect, along the row of older houses with the big front porches, back up the hill, home. He'd been walking that loop since his 30s. It wasn't a plan. It wasn't fitness. It was just the thing he did with the part of the evening when sitting still became worse than going out. During the 14 months, he walked it like a man who needed to be moving without being anywhere. Head down. Eyes on the pavement. He passed things without seeing them. Storefronts. Neighbors. The small daily theater of a residential block in a mid-sized Connecticut city going about its evening. He registered none of it. He was too busy carrying the weight of a life he hadn't figured out how to put down. He passed an older woman's house every night, the one with the window boxes full of things that shouldn't survive November but somehow did, and he passed her house and he passed her, watering those window boxes at the same time every evening, regardless of weather, regardless of season, and he didn't stop, didn't look up, didn't acknowledge her. For 14 months. Just kept walking. Her name was Sylvia. What changed first did not look like change. No letter. No phone call. No moment with music behind it. No clarity. None of the things we're told accompany the moment when a life shifts. It was a Tuesday in late November, cold enough that his breath showed. Same loop, same pavement, same badge on the same jacket. He passed Sylvia's house. She was outside with the watering can, as always, and as he drew level with her front walk she looked up and said, without much weight behind it at all, "You walk by right at 6:40, every night. I set my kettle by you." That was the whole sentence. She went right back to her watering can, not waiting for a response. The way you don't wait for a response when you've said something you consider entirely unremarkable. She wasn't trying to help him. She didn't know his name, his situation, the $612, any of it. She was just making a small observation about her neighborhood, the kind that evaporates the moment you say it. But Walter stopped on the sidewalk, breath still showing in the cold, and something in him went very quiet. A stranger had just told him, by accident, that she was wrong, that he was wrong. Someone had been setting a kettle by him. Someone had organized part of her evening around the fact that he showed up. He stood there for a moment. He didn't know what to say, so he just nodded and kept walking. He wrote nothing down that night, but the sentence stayed. He did not transform. Not that night. Not that week. Transformation is a word for brochures. What actually happened was smaller and took longer and involved a lot of evenings that looked almost exactly like the evenings before them. The first thing he changed was where he put his eyes. For months he'd kept his gaze down walking past storefronts, because a help wanted sign in a window was the kind of thing that used to make his stomach clench. A reminder of every application, every follow-up email, every phone call that went nowhere. He started reading them instead. Really reading them. Most weren't right. Some were. He applied to a few carefully, without the desperation that had been seasoning everything he'd sent out for over a year. He started saying hello. To Sylvia, who said hello back like it was nothing, which was the point. To the man who ran the corner hardware store on Prospect. To the two teenagers who skated the same stretch of sidewalk every evening and had clearly clocked him as furniture by then. None of it felt significant. None of it was supposed to. It just felt like remembering how to be a person who occupied space in a neighborhood rather than moving through it like a ghost who had forgotten what he was haunting. The second thing he changed was the badge. Not in any ceremony. No one watching. He just stood by the door one Tuesday evening, the way he always did before the walk, and he unclipped it from the zipper pull and held it for a moment. Photo half worn off, the plant's logo barely visible, 19 years reduced to a laminated rectangle the size of a playing card. And he set it in the kitchen drawer with his spare keys and the takeout menus from restaurants that had probably closed. He put the jacket on without it. Zipped it up. It felt lighter in a way that had nothing to do with the weight of a plastic badge. He opened the door and went out. The third thing he changed, and this is the one that's hardest to explain and also the only one that actually mattered, was that he let the walking be enough. Just for that hour. Whatever was waiting at home, the mail, the laptop, the numbers that didn't add up, the silence that had a specific texture by now. He let all of it stay in the apartment. He was outside. He was moving. The neighborhood was doing its evening around him. That was enough. Not forever. Just for that hour. It was the hardware store owner who mentioned it. 3 weeks after Walter had started actually making eye contact with him, after a few dozen mornings of a nod that became a hello that became 2 minutes of standing in the doorway talking about nothing in particular, the owner said there was a regional supply outfit looking for a warehouse operations lead, the kind of opening that never made it to a job board, the kind that only surfaces when someone has noticed you long enough to think of you when it comes up. Walter applied. He made it to a second round. He sat across from two people in a small office off the highway and answered questions about shift scheduling and floor management and throughput and felt, for 45 minutes, entirely like himself again. The version of himself that knew what he was doing. That had 19 years of showing up in his body, in the way he answered, in the specific unhurried confidence of a man who has done a thing long enough to stop being afraid of it. He didn't get the job. They went with someone with more recent experience, the email said, which was polite and probably true and landed like a door closing anyway. He stopped walking for 3 weeks after that. The loop sat unwalked, the shoes stayed by the door stayed shut in the evenings the way it used to. He gained back some of the weight the walking had quietly taken off. The mail collected again. The laptop stayed closed. He sat with the setback the way you sit with something you knew was always a possibility and still weren't ready for when it arrived. He put his shoes back on eventually, on a Wednesday evening in February, for no particular reason except that staying inside had finally started to feel worse than the disappointment of not getting the job. No decision. No recommitment. No internal speech about getting back up. He just put his shoes on and opened the door and walked. Almost a year after Sylvia's comment about the kettle, Walter passed her house at 6:40, the same as always, and saw the steam from her kettle rising past the kitchen window, and without thinking about it he raised a hand. She waved back without looking up from her plants. It wasn't a big moment. It wasn't supposed to be. He just noticed, walking on past the hardware store and down toward the diner and back up the hill, that the wave hadn't felt performed this time. Hadn't felt like a man remembering to be a person. It had felt like the thing itself. He noticed something else too. The walk had become the part of his day he protected. Not the part he dragged himself through. Not the thing he did when everything else had failed to fill the hours. The thing he made sure happened first before the applications and the phone calls and all the rest of it, because something about the hour before everything else turned out to be the thing that made everything else possible. He still doesn't know how to explain that. He doesn't try to. 6 months after the warehouse job didn't come through, a different one did. Smaller operation. Less money, not dramatically less, just less enough to notice. He heard about it through Sylvia's son, who mentioned it over a fence one Sunday. Inventory coordination for a regional food distributor. Not glamorous. Not 19 years of his life. Just a floor to run and a schedule to keep and people to show up for. He took it without hesitating the way the old version of him might have, weighing it against what he used to make, measuring the distance between where he'd ended up and where he'd believed he was supposed to be. He took it because it was real and it was there, and because the man who had stood by the door for 14 months afraid to be seen had, without entirely noticing it happening, become someone who had somewhere to be at 6:40 every evening and was known for it. The badge is still in the drawer. He hasn't put it back on the jacket. So here is what I want to leave you with. Not advice. Not a list. Just 3 things Walter's story makes plain. The first, the walking was never really about exercise. It was about being present for your own life on a schedule at a specific time in a specific place, consistently enough that you become someone a neighbor can set a kettle by. Not a neighbor you've worked to impress. Not someone evaluating your resume. Just a person who has noticed that you exist, that you show up. That kind of visibility rebuilds something in you that job applications alone cannot touch. It is not a productivity strategy. It is something older and more necessary than that. The second, the badge, the title, the 19 years, none of that was who Walter actually was. It was proof of where he used to stand. He didn't find out who he was by getting it back. He found out by noticing what he did with his evenings when nobody was paying him to do anything at all, when there was no audience, no performance review, no one to show up for except himself. The walk, every night, in the cold, whether or not it was going anywhere. The third thing is about the 3 weeks he stopped. That interruption was not a failure of the habit. It was part of it. Every worthwhile thing gets interrupted, usually at the exact moment when you need it most. The only question is whether you put your shoes back on after. Not dramatically. Not with a speech. Just shoes on, door open, out. There's a question worth sitting with after the screen goes dark. What's the one thing you do on a schedule, alone, without anyone asking you to, that you've never once thought of as anything important? Not a hobby. Not a practice. Just a thing you do quietly that has survived everything else that's changed. Because somewhere on your route, there might be a woman with a watering can and a kettle and 11 minutes to spare, and she might already be setting something by you. You just haven't let yourself find out yet. Walter still walks the same loop most evenings, past the same houses at roughly the same hour. The badge stays in the drawer. He hasn't missed Sylvia's kettle in months.